You are listening to MCC Votes and Seats, the podcast series of the Center for Political Science of Mathias Corvinus Collegium. We provide election insights with experts and politicians. Dear listeners, this time our podcast analysis covers the background, the circumstances, and the consequences of the October 2024 legislative election in Lithuania. We are privileged to have as a guest expert Dr. Mindaugas Jurkynas, professor at the Department of Regional Studies at Vytautas Magnus University in Kaunas, who will help us understand the bigger picture about Lithuanian politics. Dear Dr. Jurkynas, thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Hello, you just can call me Mindaugas.
Thank you very much. My name is Vytautas from the MCC Center for Political Science, and I will be your host in this episode. Off we go. The Social Democratic Party of Lithuania, LSDP, won the October 2024 parliamentary election, securing 19% of the popular vote, what means 52 seats for the party in Seimas, the National Assembly of the country. It was a considerable victory of the oldest party in Lithuania compared to their 13 seats they had after the previous election in 2020. The Homeland Union, the largest party in the outgoing center-right coalition, finished second, gaining 28 seats, which is a significant loss for them, as they had 50 mandates in the previous lineup of the assembly. What factors might explain the considerable victory of the Social Democrats and the significant loss of mandates of the Homeland Union?
That's a very broad question, and it needs a broad answer. But moreover, it needs a post-electoral survey, since now we can only speculate which were the reasons why voters chose to outvote the current ruling coalition, the outgoing ruling coalition, which consisted of three parties: a Homeland Union, which is colloquially called the Conservatives, or Conservatives Christian Democrats. Then there were two smaller junior coalition partners, the Liberal Movement and the Freedom Party. And in the post-electoral survey, people perhaps would line up their preferences, why they voted for certain parties, and that would make the picture pretty clear. Now we can only speculate and use, a menu, a list of possible reasons what may have gone wrong. So therefore, we political scientists have only a macro picture, but not micro picture, why the things have happened. And this micro picture reveals that it's true. The Social Democrats returned with a really high percentage of parliamentary seats. Now they have almost 37% of all the parliament, and they have not had such a big parliamentary faction for the last, 12, 16 years. And in reverse, the Conservatives have also suffered the biggest blow, because the Conservatives now control only 20% of parliamentary seats, which means that they also have never had such a crushing defeat for the last 16 years or so. The point is that we have to take into consideration a Lithuanian electoral system. It's called mixed parallel, which means that our parliament is divided into different electoral systems. The number of parliamentarians is 141. So 70 of them, let's say half, is elected according to the proportional formula, which means that people vote or people cast their vote for a party list and rate up to 5 candidates in the party list. If the party gets, say, like 20% of the vote, they get approximately 20% of those 70 seats, more or less. Then the other part of the parliament, 71 parliamentarians, are elected in 71 single mandate constituencies or single mandate districts, and either person gets absolute majority in the first round, or if nobody does, then two contenders with the high support go for the runoff, and in the second round a simple majority does to get a seat, because only one parliamentarian is elected from one single mandate constituency. When we have the first round, people vote for the parties and they vote for candidates in the single mandate constituencies. And after 2 weeks, usually in more than 90% of single mandate districts, people vote in the second round. So after the first round, it's not clear who won the election. And if you looked and you said yourself that the Social Democrats got around 19% of the proportional vote, at the end of the day, when you look at how much they got in the single mandate constituency second rounds or the runoffs, then the share from 19%, rose to almost 37%. So that's why the Lithuanian voting system is very disproportional. And only after the second round, when you calculate who won the single mandate constituencies, you can say, what is the size of the parliamentary faction and who won the election. Now, coming back to reasons why it happened so, as I said, it's a pure speculation, but these things will probably be the most important ones for the electorate. Well, first of all, the conservatives lost their popularity due to several things. Thing number one was, in my evaluation, that they fought a political war with a popular president. And this year, 2024, was the election year because we had elections to the European Parliament, we had elections to the Parliament, we had 2 rounds of elections of the presidential election, and the current president, Vytautas Nausėda, has been re-elected, and he won in the second round against the leader of the Conservative Party, de facto leader, not de jure leader, because the de facto leader of the Conservative Party is the outgoing Prime Minister, Ingrida Šimonytė, even though the jure leader of the Conservative Party was Gabrielius Landsbergis. And the president won landslide. He got like 75%, almost 75% in the second round against 25. So it means that the Conservatives were very unpopular. And that way you can consider presidential election as a second-order election, which kind of signals about the political mood. So you could clearly see that the conservatives have hit, rock bottom and their unpopularity. That was the first reason, because the conservatives have always tried to pick the fight with the president, with the popular president, and that may have affected the ratings negatively. The conservatives also had quite a few scandals, the legal investigations into people connected with the party members and their families. There was a conflict with the European Commission when Lithuania wanted to impose more sanctions than there was an agreement in the European Union. Then sometimes Lithuania did not stick to the sanctions and continued to allow the transit of sanctioned goods, and other scandals also contributed that the party lost the popularity. On the other hand, the voting in Lithuania, when you look at the research, deals with voting against someone. Of course, there is a share vote that people vote for somebody, but also when it comes, into the second round in the second ballot constituency. So whenever there is a member of the Conservative Party or ruling coalition in the second round, so most likely this person will lose because all the others will vote against that person. Well, maybe except, the capital Vilnius, where the Conservatives and the Liberals have a higher support, but nonetheless, the Conservatives also lost some single mandate constituencies, even in the capital. That means that the voting against them is also a very strong indication that they're not liked, and they have been even, disliked a lot. So that's, very briefly to say about the reasons. As for the Social Democrats, they have been in political hibernation, so they have not been in the government for the last 7 years. They have looked as a credible alternative. The leader of the Social Democrats, Vilija Blinkevičiūtė, was considered as one of the most popular politicians, even though she decided not to stand for the office of the Prime Minister, even though she had promised to. But her popularity, I guess, was also an important factor in drawing many people to vote for the Social Democrats. So that's, in summation, perhaps the most important things why we have such a political constellation in the parliament for the day. In terms of geopolitics, in terms of foreign and security policy, Lithuania has a rather strong consensus. I wouldn't say that there are any, differences when it comes to foreign policy. So all these issues as support for Ukraine and how to tackle, Russia's neighborhood. These are very clear-cut, and all the major parties, all the parties actually that crossed the electoral threshold, and all the candidates that won the single mandate constituencies, they do not differ on those issues. So I don't think that there was any, major political gamble on those questions. There were a couple of parties which actually wanted, kind of support like a peace, whatever peace means, but these parties did not get, over this 5% barrier that parties need to cross in order to get some seats in the parliament.
Talking about the parties that crossed the threshold, Mindaugas, I saw many new parties on the list. In a nutshell, how would you describe the main messages, ideologies, and programs of the major political players that contested in the 2024 legislative election?
Well, if you look at the numbers, then you see that not so many parties crossed the electoral threshold. We had just, let me count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 parties, just 6 parties. and only one of them is new, which is called the Dawn of Nemunas. Nemunas is the largest river, and it means that this party got 15% of the parliamentary seats. This party is in a way built on the remainings of the now extinct party Order and Justice to some extent. On the other hand, that was also partly because of the protest vote, but still it was the protest vote against the outgoing government consisting of conservatives, liberals, and the Freedom Party. Otherwise, other parties were more or less the established parties. Okay, you can also say that another party, Union of Democrats, is new because they stood for the election for the first time, but they are the splinter from the Peasants' Party. So in a way, they are not new to politics as they were in politics earlier. Within another party. And the other parties are quite traditional. As I said, the winner Social Democrats have this Lithuanian social democratic profile, not this, postmodern social democratic profile as it could be in the established consolidated democracies, since, our social democrats are, if not culturally conservative, then they are in the center. So they not support, those liberal conservative cultural policies. Then we have, on the contrary, the Conservative Party, which is quite liberal in a way on these cultural issues, but not all the party members are that liberal because there is a faction of Christian Democrats in the Conservative Party which are culturally conservative. And then we had two liberal parties, the Liberal Movement, which crossed the threshold, and we had this Freedom Party, which was very socially and culturally liberal. And they were like, two problem parties. One is decriminalization of soft drugs, and the other was more rights to LGBT community, and plus ratification of the Istanbul Convention. And this party was not associated with anything else but these three socially, culturally liberal issues, but they didn't cross the 5% threshold. And then we have the Peasant and the Greens Union, which is the socially conservative party, economically on the left. Yeah, I guess I've mentioned all the parties. The new parties, Dawn of Nemunas and Union of Democrats, they are socially on the left. The Social Democrats also economically on the left. The Liberal Movement and the Conservatives, they are economically on the right, but socially on the left. And we have the Peasants, who are economically on the left and culturally on the right. These are the main parties and the main ideologies. So all in all, 6 political parties.
Now let's focus on the campaign. What were the most socially divisive issues this time? And how would you describe the main social divides in the country and their relationship to the party system?
Well, I guess the main idea was the social inequality. According to the Gini coefficient, inequality in Lithuania between the rich and the poor is the second highest for Bulgaria. And regional differences between the capital and the rest of the cities or urban rural areas was visible. Then there was also a strong backlash against the culturally liberal push the government tried to do, but never succeeded. Like pushing for the law of the partnership for the all people, but aiming in the LGBT community, and pushing other culturally liberal policies, which in socially conservative society like Lithuania were not accepted. Foreign policy, as I said, it was more or less foreign security policy was a consensus issue, and that were the most important and discussed issues, talking about economy, social welfare, long queues waiting for the doctors at the clinics, so the hospitals, underfinancing of the welfare state. So these socioeconomic issues were the most important and the most dividing, so to speak. When it comes to societal cleavages of social groups, then of course the conservatives, the liberals, and the Freedom Party get their support in the urban areas among more educated, better off electorate. And on the contrary, the Social Democrats, the new parties, and the Peasants, they are more popular in the provinces, smaller towns, and villages. And these are the main kind of voter attachments. The most disciplined electorate belongs to the Homeland Union, the conservative Christian democratic parties. They always have glass ceilings. So the stable electorate votes for them no matter what, but this time the support for them dropped in the proportional part. As you see, they got like almost 18% of the vote. But then when it comes to the second round in the districts, when you vote 2 weeks after, then it's not sufficient to have just your core local loyal and disciplined electorate, because all the others go against you. So this is the party with the most loyal electorate, but at the same time, this is the party which has most of the enemies. And unless there are any partners in coalition partners, then this party is never in the government. Then usually the Conservatives win the election, then they stay in the position for 8 years, and again they win the election, and again they stay for 8 years, because their political arrogance and the scandals push them for the hibernation and opposition for a couple of terms at least. At least that's what we see in our political history in the last 34 years. In foreign policy, the Conservatives always wanted to play the upper hand, but according to Constitution, is the president who is responsible for foreign policy in Lithuania, and the Conservatives didn't like it. So when it came to the war in Ukraine, president was the number one person supporting Ukraine and speaking on these foreign and security, national security policy issues. Then when it was time to deal with the pandemic, so pandemic was a crisis which also affected the previous government, the peasants' government, and then it continued when the Conservatives came to power. So it was not exceptionally the crisis that only the Conservative Party had to work with. Then another crisis was these illegal migrants sent through the Belarusian-Lithuanian border, and that was the case when the government in the beginning messed up. But then a wall has been, a fence, protective fence has been erected to stop the illegal crossings, as Lithuania is the eastern country when it comes to the eastern border management of the European Union, and it being in the Schengen area, you have to control your borders, not only through the border crossing points, but also the borders itself, so that illegal migrants do not cross in and travel further. So that was the crisis the government had to deal with. In the beginning, they didn't manage well, but then they ran up well, and now this fence is kind of protected, and all the observation systems and infrastructure has been have been installed properly, and now from what I hear, that illegal crossings, illegal migrants caught, I mean, these numbers have dropped to minimum.
As you just mentioned in the beginning of our conversation, the major political parties, they agree in the most important directions of foreign policy in Lithuania.
True. It's true. I mean, there is this consensus on foreign and national security policies. I mean, we don't have that much luxury, and that's why we don't even have Eurosceptic parties. As we look at the European Union and NATO, I mean, support for EU and NATO, Lithuania runs like 85%. Lithuanians are among the most Euro enthusiastic in the European Union when you look at the data of the Eurobarometers.
So, talking about the borders of the country, now that everyone could virtually visualize the map of Lithuania in their heads, Mindaugas, do you mind discussing the main electoral geography and electoral sociology features of Lithuania? Did the election results show any urban-rural or north-south or east-west divide?
There is a divide between urban and rural voters, as urban voters tend to vote more for the Conservative Party, Liberal Party, and the Freedom Party. Then the people in the rural areas, small towns, opt for left or left of center parties, like the Social Democrats, the Peasants, the Union of Democrats, the Dawn of Nemunas, and that's the main picture. The second one is that the more educated people and the more economically they are better off, they also tend to vote for economically center-right parties, and those who are with less education, less wealthy, have a less qualified jobs, then they tend to vote for the leftist party. So this divide is quite important. And I guess that there is also a certain echo of the old and first left-right divide, being, anti-communist and kind of, well, not pro-communist, but let's say, how you evaluate the Soviet past, in the beginning of the 90s, and some people said, oh, everything is bad and let's drop it. And the other said, no, not everything was bad. I mean, we lived, that was our life. And there are certain positive elements, except, the occupation and the Soviet regime and this authoritarian structure. But there were also cultural, social developments and people's networks, and they were important. So that was the divide. And those who were against the Soviet past and denigrated it and evaluated that from the negative point of view actually were the parties on the right, like the conservatives and the others. And those who said that, well, not everything was bad in the Soviet past, these parties were on the left, like Social Democrats, ex-Communist Party. They later merged into the Party of Social Democrats. So that kind of divide is also, in my opinion, resonating somewhere as educated people who are better off, people who benefited from post-communist transformation to market economy, to democracy elsewhere. They were supporting more the parties on the right, and people who were not as successful in this old post-communist transition, who longed for social welfare and the lack of the state services and social entitlements. These people voted for the left. So there is a certain connection there too. Even though, 34 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, fewer and fewer people remember that.
Okay, and as a last question, did you find the 2024 election and campaign any different from the previous ones?
Well, it is always different because you always have different topics. You didn't have war, Russia against Ukraine 4 years ago. Okay, we had pandemic, but you didn't have the migrant crisis 4 years ago. So in that respect, different topics are reflected differently in the electoral campaign. Secondly, I guess the variety of sources of information during the electoral campaign was as big, as broad as never, because next to traditional media, TV and radio and some news portals, different social platforms, different social networks were also used for advertising, debating, discussing, arguing, and so on. So I guess that the big variety of source of information and platforms for interaction could also be the mark of the current electoral campaign.
Dr. Mindaugas Jurkynas from Vytautas Magnus University, we are truly grateful for the most enlightening and interesting insights into Lithuanian politics you just kindly gave us. Thank you for your time. We wish you all success for your current and future endeavors.
Thank you. Thank you a lot, Balint. Maybe we'll be in touch when it comes to the discussion of political issues in Lithuania, should you need comment on that.
Thank you very much. Dear listeners, you've been listening to the latest episode of Votes and Seats about the October 2024 legislative election in Lithuania. Thank you for your kind attention. Stay tuned for our next episodes. Take care. Goodbye.